So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about something which I actually think is really important to talk about, which is disappointment in pottery and sort of how to manage feelings, how to what to do, whether you need to do anything, just a kind of exploration about our feelings of disappointment in pottery. Because I actually think disappointment in pottery, we don't really talk about it that much, as potters, I think, and it can really hold you back from like learning, especially if you're kind of like new to pottery, you might be experiencing like a lot of disappointment in pottery. Even if you're very far on in your career as a potter, you can still be experiencing a lot of disappointment in pottery. And just wanted to really talk about all the different aspects and some mindset shifts basically that I have been working on in terms of when disappointment in pottery like comes up for me, like what I do, what I try and think instead, sort of thing. Right, so let's get into the episode. So okay, so like what am I actually even talking about in terms of disappointment in pottery? So for me, disappointment in pottery would manifest when I was going to like pottery evening classes when I was learning pottery. I would often have this thing that would happen to me where basically I'd been working really hard on something, say like it was a pot, and I'd been thinking for ages about like what glaze I wanted to put on it, and I'd glazed it one week and it's maybe spent the whole lesson glazing this pot, maybe painting it like intricately. Um, yeah, try my absolute best. And then like I would put it on the, glazed shelf to be glaze fired. And then the next week I would pick up my pot and then I would have this like sinking feeling of disappointment when I saw the pot, when I saw it come out, it's the finished pot out of the kiln, I'd be like, and I think for me it was like this kind of mismatch between like what I expected, or like what kind of, what maybe what was in my mind's eye, and then like what the the reality of like what that pot then had to become after it had been fired. So it kind of, in a way, like it kind of could sometimes suck my enjoyment out of pottery, because like I guess I was thinking about it in terms of like, oh, the whole point is to make something that I'm really like proud of, and if there's anything kind of inverted commas wrong with it, say like I didn't quite like the color or something, or maybe a little bit had chipped off or something in the glaze firing, or maybe it had warped a bit or something, then it could like kind of overshadow, I suppose, like the whole enjoyment of making it. Which is, yeah, the joy of pottery is in the process, not necessarily like the outcome. Okay, so let me talk to you about some mindset shifts that I've actually like sort of employed to try and like shift my thinking away from this. So the problem with this disappointment in pottery is that it can really stop you from learning, I think. So if you're very focused on the kind of end result of like what your pot's going to look like, you kind of do end up missing out, the enjoyable part of pottery, which is like the learning, the growing, the making stuff, the actual physical process, using your hands to make something incredible. You kind of like letting all the joy be sucked out of that process by a random thing that could happen in the kiln, that you have no control over, basically. Okay, so this is the way I think about, like, my feelings of disappointment that still come up and probably will always come up, throughout my kind of pottery practice forever, basically. Because what I want to say first is that I actually think that disappointment is maybe a natural part of kind of any creative process, or certainly the pottery making process. So So I have this thing now where when I've got my own kiln now, obviously, I have my own pottery, and like every time I open the kiln, I always have this similar feeling where I'm just like, oh no, and I kind of look through all the pots, and then maybe like one of them, it's got like, say like I don't think the color's quite right. Is it maybe a bit too light or a bit too dark? Or like maybe the shape isn't quite right. Maybe something's happened in the kiln where gosh, I don't know, strange things happen in the kiln sometimes, or maybe if a pot has little feet, there might be like, a teeny weeny bit that's like possibly stuck to the kiln shelf, through some kind of random event, or maybe it's a crack that's appeared from from nowhere. So quite often when I open the pottery kiln now, I'll have this thing where I feel this kind of wave of disappointment. So what I'm trying to understand, like for myself now, is that that is actually just a normal part of every time I open the kiln. It's something I just need to kind of embrace really and accept as just part of my creative practice. So I open the kiln, I have this feeling of disappointment. Often I'll go away, like have a cup of tea or something, and then I'll come back and things are never as bad as I thought they were. So I'll like go through it again. I'm like, oh, that's actually the colour's fine on that one. So I think what I'm trying to conceptualize recently is that this feeling of disappointment, this kind of heart sinking feeling of like, oh no, is just a really normal part of like my own creative kind of practice, creative flow. There are these ups and downs, kind of, I guess, emotional ups and downs, which are kind of just going to be part of that process. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean I've done anything wrong. It doesn't mean that I need to necessarily change anything. It's just kind of an acceptance that this is something that that I always feel when I open the kiln every time. Okay, so yeah, another thing to say is that the second thing, the second way that I've been sort of trying to think about disappointment differently in my pottery practice is that pottery, things are always going wrong with the pottery making process. So yeah, this is, I think this is just like part of making pottery. So even if you're extremely experienced potter, things will always go wrong in pottery because there are some things that you can control and there are some things that you just can't control. So what happens in the kiln often is quite, mystical. We'll never know what's happening in that kiln at those really high temperatures. Even if you've done everything you can, it might be like, your pot might be drying in a slightly different atmosphere. The weather might be different, and there might be something kind of slightly weird in the clay or something. Maybe I don't know. Um, you think you've wedged it really well, but maybe there's an air bubble still in there or something, and or maybe it causes a crack, and just things can just happen. Yeah, so I think it's really another way to think of pottery is that it's like, sometimes these things do just happen. Sometimes things happen that you don't want, like fault inverted commas will just happen with your pottery. This is just a completely normal part of like the pottery making process. And the thing that I have to sort of accept really is that sometimes things aren't, inverted commas, perfect, and that is actually a natural part of pottery. We don't want them to be perfect. We quite often we want our pottery to have like the mark of the maker. We want our pottery to be that sort of natural organic thing. It is impossible for it to be like absolutely perfect. And problems with the making process, random things going wrong, that is all pottery, part of pottery too. So, I'm interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make your own pottery glaze recipe. So, if you are a total beginner to glaze making and it's something you've wanted to maybe try, but you're not really sure where to start, this guide is specifically designed to take you through all the steps you need to know from start to finish, all the ingredients you need, all the equipment you need, and also how to fire your pottery glaze at the end. So, even if you're not new to glaze making and you just want a pottery glaze recipe that's very simple and specifically made with eco conscious ingredients, then this guide is also for you. So, you can get the guide in the show notes, there's a link, but also you can go on to the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's go back to the episode. Okay, so the third thing to say about disappointment in pottery is it often indicates that we're at the very edge of our kind of the growth edge of our skills and experience. So say like for example, you've tried something like a new technique where we've like joined clay together for the first time in a new way and say like it hasn't worked out or something. We've learned so much from that process. So, to kind of completely turn around that thinking from like, oh, it's wrong, it's failed, how disappointing. So like this means that I've learned something new. I've learned something new about the clay I'm using. I've learned something new about my skills. I've practiced something new. I could have tried out maybe like a new glaze recipe that actually, maybe didn't look very nice, or it's like all of these things are teaching us so much about pottery. So it's like bringing that back to like learning. It's like the kind of the value, I suppose, the way of thinking about it, the value is in like that learning and growing, and like becoming that potter that we want to be in terms of like, just all the things, all the different things we've tried, all the curiosity that we've like followed, all of our curiosities, um, all the confidence that it's brought us from doing new things in like a new way, though that's the value, not the kind of the pot that comes out of the kiln. So yeah, so turning it around to kind of really appreciate the fact that it means that we are really growing and learning, and that we are at the edge of our skills, in terms of like growing those skills. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is just read you out some passages from the book, A Potter's Book by Bernard Leach. So this is one of the kind of most, I guess, like kind of foundational pottery texts, because Bernard Leach was one of the founders of studio pottery in the UK. So started the pottery in Cornwall in the 1920s and really kind of pioneered this like, studio pottery, potter as a kind of artist crafter, kind of, yeah, type of pottery. So um, a potter's book was first published in 1940, and then there's been loads of different editions, and this edition I got out of the library, it's actually from 1976. And what's so cool about this book is that the front half of the book is kind of like all about like different techniques and stuff. So it's kind of like, geared towards just kind of like teaching people different ways of like, using like using clay, making pots, and all the different techniques that Bernard Leach uses and all the different equipment and stuff like that. But then the back half is actually really, it's so interesting. It's basically like a kind of part kind of potter's diary about all the things that Bernard Leach was like doing on a daily basis, like and then it's also a series of letters to like different potters. And in this edition, the 1976 edition, it doesn't have all the dates or like who the letters are written to. But I know from just like reading other books that Bernard Leach was, writing to potters such as Catherine Pleydell Bouverie. She was a prolific like ash glazer, using plant ashes in her glazes, and so they wrote a lot of letters to each other about like the different techniques used in that and stuff. But yeah, in this book, there's some super interesting parts which are about kind of just basically disappointment in pottery. I wanted to read you because it's like, yeah, it's really good to know that like every single potter, no potter, even if they're one of the most famous kind of established UK potters, um, UK potters, they will still will no one's immune from the kind of the disappointments and the kind of randomness of pottery techniques, and your pot coming out the kiln all strange and stuff. So okay, let me read you a couple of bits out of this book. Okay, so this is a diary entry where Bernard Leach is talking about unpacking the biscuit kiln. Um, okay, so in the afternoon we unpacked the biscuit kiln. A few handles were sprung at the hilts because the pots themselves had been allowed to dry too far before the handles were attached, and unfortunately, one or two of my large pots had cracks in the bases. This was due to the lack of care on my part. I had got so much into the habit of throwing with the intention of hollowing out by turning that I had not made an allowance for the fact that some of these pots were not going to be turned. It is almost impossible to mend such cracks because the shrinkage of the clay opens them out still further during the subsequent hard firing. Yeah. Okay. So that's Bernard Leach opening a bisque firing and finding out that loads of pots had cracks in and the handles had like cracked off. So how disappointing, and this is from, I think, yeah, this is from the 1930s, this particular diary entry. So the pottery, the St. Ives pottery was started in like 1920. So yeah, I mean that's, over 10 years into a pottery practice that these things are, happening to Bernard Leach. And that is like, just goes to show, doesn't it? It's just like, it's just part of being a potter. Um, so I wanted to read you out another bit about Bernard Leach being disappointed, and so this is relates to the first thing I said about, perhaps disappointment is just like a normal part of like a creative process. So Bernard Leach has written. So this is a kind of diary entry about opening the kiln. So this is opening a glaze kiln. So by the Leech writes, altogether, it was one of those days which make a potter's existence worthwhile. Nevertheless, at the end of it, when the pots were all out and the best of them assembled in a group, I experienced a sudden depression. This may have been partly due to the enervation from the heat and from general tiredness, but I think every artist and potter will know what I mean. At any rate, it is counterbalanced by a realistic self criticism and various practical suggestions as to future efforts, which always arise during the unpacking. So, how interesting is that? So this is like, just very established potter talking about just this feeling where you unpack a kiln and you're like, could that have been better? Could that not? And that is actually just part of the creative process. Um, Yes, I just wanted to read it out to you. Just so you kind of like, if you are experiencing disappointment in your own pottery practice, don't let that stop you. You're not doing anything wrong. Don't let that stop you from kind of continually kind of trying new things, like following your curiosity, enjoying your pottery, growing, like, learning. It just means that you have the courage basically to kind of hold those uncomfortable feelings, and you have the courage to continue, and you have the courage to keeping on learning in the face of some feelings of disappointment. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. So yeah, I just wanted to do an episode on it, so that yeah, it's like it's just part of pottery. It's disappointment, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I've really loved talking to you about this, and I'm really looking forward to chatting to you on the next episode. And until then, wishing you very happy potting, and I'll see you then. Bye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.